Okay, for this section, we're going to be doing the third exercise, which is spatial interpolation for the focus on angular. So that just means that we're going to be moving our object on an angular path. It means a non-curvy path. So first, let's create a new composition for that exercise. So you can do that by going to Composition, New Composition, and everything on the dialog box should be the same as the previous two exercises. So presumably, we shouldn't have to change anything but the name. I'm just going to call this Exercise 3. And it's going to say width 1920 by 1080 square pixels, 24 frames per second frame rate. Full resolution is fine, and the duration is 5 seconds. Background color, I'm just using black, but you can change the background color. If you're going to be using dark colored objects, then you're probably going to want your background color to be a bright color. So I'm just going to hit OK. And we get a blank screen. So the first thing we're going to want to do is either create the path that the object's going to be moving on, or we're going to want to create the object itself that's going to be moving. Let's create the path. So I can do that by going to Layer, New, Shape Layer. And I want the path to be a bit more varied than the primitives that we've been working with so far. So I'm going to create the path manually by using what's called the pen tool. The pen tool allows you to have a little bit more of a freehand approach to your graphics. Now you have to be careful about how you use the pen tool, because if you want to have curves or if you want to have straight lines, those are differences that you can have with the pen tool depending on how you place your points down. So with the pen tool, again, I only want angular. That means I don't want any curves, no handles. So for the pen tool, to do that, you just place your points down by left mouse tapping. So just tapping the left mouse button once every time you want to place a new point. So I'm going to place down a point, tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. And that places all of your points down. Now, if you have if the object is filling in and you don't want it to, you can go to your fill. Right now, my fill by default is off, but you can turn it on or off by holding down Option and clicking through it. But I did want it to be off, so that's fine. Off just means that there is no fill at all. It is transparent, and it's indicative by a gray rectangle with a red line through it. But you do want to be able to see it at all. So you're going to probably want to have a stroke. I'm using a white stroke that's 2 pixels. But the correct size is just whatever is easy to see. So if you are not happy with the object that you drew and you want to make any changes, you can do so by clicking on the selection tool. It's all the way to the left of the toolbar. It looks like a little arrow. And if you click on underneath Shape Layer 1, you have Contents, Shape, Path, Stroke, Gradient, all these different things that have filled up. I'm going to close Gradient. And I'm going to go to Path 1. And when you hit Path 1, any of the points placed down are going to look like empty squares. And that just means that they are selectable. If you click on them, they will fill in. So I'm just going to move them around a little bit to make some changes. There we go. Okay, and once you are happy with the change that you made, and I'm changing them by left mouse down and dragging the points. There we go. So once you're happy with it, I want to rename the Shape Layer 1. I'm going to do that by clicking on it and hitting the return key on the keyboard. The text will highlight, and I'm going to call this Guide or Reference Guide. And I'm going to click on the little arrow to the left of Guide to close the guide layer. So everything is still accessible. I'm just closing it for now because I really don't have any need to do anything with this other than have it as a reference. I am going to move it though a little bit. I'm going to take the selection tool, click on the layer. I'm just going to grab the whole thing and move it over. And so if you have the entire layer selected, it just moves the position. I don't have to go inside the transform to do this, although I could if I wanted to. It's not imperative because there are no keyframes here right now. It's just a single graphic. Now I'm going to lock the layer by clicking on the little square underneath the lock icon in the Layers panel. Click on it inside the timeline. And again, we have this blue bar that goes from the first frame all the way to the 5th second. And that's just whenever you create a graphic that is a still image, by default, unless it's been altered in the preferences of After Effects, it should just have the object fill in the entire timeline of your composition, however long that is. So we're going to create another layer, new, shape, and I'm just going to use the ellipse tool primitive, left mouse down and drag a little circle, and I'm holding down the shift key to ensure that this is a proper circle. And I do want to give it a fill, so I'm going to go to hold down option and click on fill so that it is a filled color, and I'm going to turn the stroke to 0 pixels so that it does not have a stroke. Next, I'm going to use the pan behind or anchor point tool. It's both the same object, same icon. And when I click on it, the anchor point that was down here disappeared, and I've got a little tiny one in here. And sometimes that happens because this is a freshly made shape layer and it's referring to the position of the inside of the ellipse. And all we just have to do is click off of it, and then I'm going to bring my arrow back over and left mouse click back on it. And now the anchor point has reappeared. So I'm just going to left mouse down and drag it into the circle. That will make the path a lot easier to follow. Okay, so with that there, I'm going to go to Shape Layer 1, click on it, hit the return key, and name this Circle. And I'm going to close Contents because I don't want to go into the ellipse and do anything with this. There are transform attributes inside. It is alterable, but I don't want to alter anything inside of the ellipse contents. I just want to alter information under the transform. These transform attributes are on pretty much every single layer that you would ever make in After Effects, and that's usually your go-to for any animation that is of these features. There are times you may want to go into the contents and alter them, and a lot of them are animatable attributes, and it can be very helpful to do that. We don't really want to do that right now. We want to keep it simple. So what we're going to want to do is put the circle on any of the corners, one of them, doesn't matter which, wherever you want it to start. So I'm just going to have it start at the corner here on the arrow, and I'm zooming in by rolling the mouse wheel. And then when you get close, it's close, but now I can't really see the circle anymore. It's close to a different section of the visuals than I really want to use. I want to move over and move the image to the left. So to do that, I can hold down the space bar. And if I hold down the space bar, my arrow turns into a little hand. I can left mouse down and drag. And now I can see my circle. And I'm going to have it pause for a half second. Actually, no, let's do a sixth of a second. Or a 6 frames in, so that's a quarter of a second. And then next to the position key, I'm going to select on the stopwatch, and that puts a keyframe right at this point. Then I'm going to move about 6 frames ahead, so another quarter of a second, and I'm going to move my object to the next point. If it gets hard to see, and if we want to see the arrow on top, I can move it by grabbing the circle layer, left mouse down and drag so that it creates a thick blue line underneath the guide layer. And all that means is that if I were to let go with the left mouse button, it will move the layer underneath the guide layer, the layer that I had selected, which is the circle layer. So I'm going to let go, and now the guide is on top and I can better see it. Now I'm going to go about a second, and maybe a little less than that, or that's half a second in. Let's try 8 frames later. Probably a little more than that, maybe 9 frames later. And I'm going to move it over. So what I'm trying to do is maintain roughly the same amount of spacing throughout. So it's going to be a little bit boring in its pacing, not very exciting, because it'll be about the same rate. But it's a good way of practicing and making sure that you're doing everything in a controlled manner. And keeping everything maintained will also help you prevent accidentally having bursts of speed or awkward slowdowns when we start getting into elements like bouncing a ball. So we're just trying to make sure that we can control and maintain control of the spacing of our in-betweens. Now, one thing you may notice as well is that the path is now curved, which can be nice if that's what we want to do, but that's not really what we want right now. And the reason why that happens is because After Effects is assuming that we want to have curves in our path, because typically in animation we do, but in this case we do not. There are a few ways that we can get rid of the curve here and turn it into straight lines. We can do it while we're animating, So we can go back and fix this right now, or we could keep going and fix it when we're done. I'm going to keep going and fix it when we're done, because if I start fixing it as I go, some of it might get undone. So I'm just going to go to the next point. So it took about 8 frames to get here, and I'm looking at the spacing between these in-between frames, and they look about the same. So it looks like my guess on timing was pretty okay. So that was 9 frames later. So I'm going to go about another 9 frames. So it's 3, 6, 106. It's going to be my guess. I believe that's about 9 frames later. I'm going to take this, left mouse down and drag. And we still have a curve here, which is not what we want, but we can fix it. There is a bit more space here, though. So the spacing between these frames is a bit wider than here. So what I'm looking at is the negative spacing between them. It's a bit larger. So that just means that this is traveling quicker, which makes sense. The distance here is a bit longer. So probably put the keys a little too close if I'm trying to maintain the same speed here and here. So I'm just going to take the keyframe, and I can move it on the timeline, move it farther apart. So moving keyframes farther apart will slow it down. Moving keyframes closer together will speed it up. So I'm going to move it a little farther. Now, as I was moving the keyframe to the left, you may have noticed that this ball did not move. But when I move it to the right, it does. The reason why is because my time indicator is right on 106. And when I'm moving the keyframes before 106, well, those things have already happened by the time we get to where we're at in the timeline. Where if I move it to the right, now my timeline, this object gets to this point at about 108, which means that where my time indicator is 106 is when the animation is happening. So let's try. That looks about right, spacing-wise. There we go. Once we get rid of the arcs, that might have an effect on our spacing, and we may need to adjust, but should be okay for now. So there's a small space here, and that was about 6, 12, so about half a second. I'm sorry, 1/4 of a second. So I'm going to go about 6 ahead. 8 plus 6 is 14. And I'm going to move this over. And it looks like the speed is about okay. And I'm going to go up here, and that was 6. Let's try 7. Move this up. And let's try 8. 21. 205 maybe. Okay, and then I'm going to 6, try 216, 10 frames. Okay. And this is a very short distance, so let's give it less time. Let's try 3, might be a little too short, but let's try it. Yeah, 3's a little too short. It is arcing a lot, though, so that might make a difference, but let's move it over just a little bit. Okay, let's try that for now. Once we get rid of the arcs, that will probably make a difference. Okay, so I'm going to go, what was that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try that again. 4, so 3 seconds, because 24 frames per second. Here. 304. Here. 308. Here. This is a bit farther, so let's try 318. Okay, and let's try 4 seconds in. Oops. That was accidentally scaling. The reason why that happened was because I took my arrow and accidentally grabbed one of the little blue squares around my circle rather than grabbing the center. Okay, let's put it there, and that is a little too. The little in-betweens are too far spaced. That means I'm not giving it enough time. It's going too fast compared to the others. So I'm just going to grab this key and move it over a little. Here we go. And again, once I get rid of these arcs, this might make a difference. And then Let's try 12 frames later, and I want to go back to the starting point. So I'm just going to grab the first keyframe, left mouse click on it, or left mouse down and drag a square and then let go, and that will automatically select it as well. Hold down Command and hit the C key, and then while the time indicator is on the frame that you want to paste your frame down, hold down Command and hit the B key. And there we go. This still looks like there's a little bit too fast. Let's see after we've gotten rid of all these curves, because we have a lot of curves in here that we do not want. So let's take care of that first, and then we'll see if the spacing has any issues. So if we want to get rid of the curves, what's causing these curves to happen are these handles. And you can see any handles by clicking on a keyframe that has curves coming in or out of it, and you can check and see if handles are present. If you've not manipulated the handles yet, then they may just appear as two little circles, one coming out of each side. And if you left mouse down and drag on it, then the handle itself will appear. It'll look like a seesaw. It'll behave like a seesaw as well. If I were to move this up and down, you can see that the other one is responding in course. So if you want to get rid of a handle, you can left mouse down and drag to the keyframe. And this does work. But if we're doing this to a bunch of keyframes, then it's not an overly, it will work, but it will take longer than necessary. So we can do that, but let's try another way. A way that's much quicker is you can left mouse down on the pen tool, and by left mouse down I just mean moving your mouse over the icon and then holding the left mouse button down on top of it. That'll bring out a little submenu. And with that submenu out, I'm still holding down the left mouse button, and I'm going over to the Convert Vertex tool. It looks like an upside down V. When you let go of the left mouse button, it will appear inside your icon as your primary icon. So what this allows us to do is allows us to pull out handles from any keyframes that don't have handles in them already, or we can manipulate the handles independently so they won't behave like a seesaw. That's called breaking the tangents. Or in this case, we can use it to get rid of the handles we don't want. So we can just click on it, click, click, and I'm holding down the space bar to call the hand tool, and with the hand tool selected or temporarily called by holding onto the space bar, I can left mouse down and drag, click, 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 hold down the space bar, left mouse down and drag, let go of the space bar to access whatever tool I was using before, which in this case is the Convert Vertex tool. Now I'm going to click on these other keyframes, hold down space, click here, and I think that was, yeah, that one was already clicked, and there we go. So now I'm going to check and see if I fall off the path at all. And I can zoom in close to check more carefully. And again, you can zoom in by holding down Command and hitting the plus or minus keys on the keyboard, or you can roll your mouse wheel if your mouse has a wheel. Or you can go down here to where it says, on my case, 400%. For yours, it may say something different, depending on the degree of magnification of your document. Okay. Now let's check the timing and spacing. So the spacing primarily is the how quick we go from one key to the other throughout the duration of the entire animation. So I'm going to close the guide by poking the little eyeball to the left of the guide layer to make it disappear for now, because I want to see the little dots. What I'm looking for is inconsistent spacing. So it just means inconsistent spacing between the little dots. Dots that are closer together like this means that they are going slower. These are a little spaced out a little farther, which means they're going a little quicker. And what's right or wrong can depend on what's happening in your scene. There can be proper speeds for the action, but this is an abstract action, so there's not a 100% this is how it should go. So, let's see, this one's going a little quicker, this is going a little quicker. These two are about the same speed. This is a little quicker, it looks like, than this is. Where is this one? So I'm going to click on this keyframe, and I can see it right here highlighted. So again, if we want to make an action quicker or slower, quicker is bringing keyframes farther away from each other. Bringing them closer gives you, bringing keyframes closer together gives you less time for something to happen, so it will be quicker. If you move the keyframes farther apart, you're giving it more time to go the distance, so it will go slower. So if I nudge this, okay, and as I'm moving this, you can see the little dots are moving on both sides because I'm bringing it, whichever way I move it, it's going closer to the key before it and farther from the key after. So that key, and then there's this one. Okay, looks okay. Let's see how it looks in motion. So I'm just going to go to the beginning and hit the space bar and see. Let's turn on the guide. Okay, so let's slow this one down a little more. Okay. So again, when you're moving your keyframes, you can move multiple keyframes at once. So let's say you want to change the speed here, you want to slow it down, but you're happy with the speed between these two keys. And if I were to move this one over, it's going to affect the relationship or the timing between this key and the one before and the one after. But if I want to grab both and then I move it, it maintains the speed between these two keys because they're being moved at the same time, the same distance over the timeline. So their speed is maintained. Okay, let's try that. Okay, up here is a little quick as well. Looks like. Here we go. So between this frame and this frame, it's a little fast. So I'm just going to left mouse down and drag this group and move it over to slow that down. That looks better. And not huge changes. And there we are. Now let's add a title to it. So I'm going to go to the type tool, click inside, and I'm going to call it Spatial Interpolation Angular. Again, that just means that it's moving in an angular manner. All of these edges are pointed. And there we go. That is, and I'm just going to save this by holding down the Command key and hitting the S key on the keyboard while still holding down Command, or you can go to File, Save. If you wanted to save a new version, so let's say you were working on this and you planned on making some changes and you're not sure that you're going to be happy with those changes, you can go to File, Save As, or Save a Copy or Increment and Save, and that will allow you to create a new version of the After Effects file with all of your information saved on it, and then you'll have two versions, and as you update it and make the changes that you're not sure you're going to like, you'll have a version that has those changes, and then another version that precedes those changes. That can be helpful in a real-world production because you may have a client, or even you yourself may not be sure if the changes are going to be beneficial or not. That way when you make the changes, and if you decide that you're not happy with it or you want to see what it looked like compared to the other, you have both versions and can always roll back to it later. So that is creating an animation of an object working along or moving along an angular path.